And listen as I read about Moses' last moments in his pilgrimage on the earth. Deuteronomy chapter 34. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed, and his vigor unabated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. Well, what can we learn from the death of Moses? What can we learn that will help us to live our lives today? I think the first lesson that we can learn from the death of Moses is that Moses died the same way he lived. Look again at verses 1 through 5. It says, Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim, Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. Did you notice in verse 1 that the last thing that Moses did on earth was climb a mountain? The last thing he did was climb a mountain. He died climbing. The summit of Mount Pisgah reaches 4,500 feet above the Dead Sea. It's just under a mile. Now, there's not too many 120-year-old men who can climb a mountain that's almost a mile high and live to tell the story. I was up on a pumpkin yesterday just navigating a stepladder, and I'm not even half Moses' age. And yet here was Moses, 120 years old, scaling a mountain. You know, maybe climbing Mount Pisgah was on his bucket list, and it was, the last thing to check off before he died. I don't know. What I do know for certain, though, is I think that verse 1 is a fitting metaphor for the life of Moses. Moses was a man who was not satisfied with status quo. He wasn't satisfied with okay. This was a man who was not content to see his people as slaves in Egypt. He wanted to deliver them from bondage and bring them back into the promised land. Moses wasn't satisfied with having a nice, average Bible study and prayer time every day. He wasn't content with merely spending 7 minutes with God. This was a man who wanted more and more of God. This was a man who begged God, show me your glory. Moses wanted a better, deeper, stronger, richer relationship with God. He wasn't satisfied with just okay. Moses wanted that same depth of relationship for his people. And he got so frustrated when the people refused to obey, when they so quickly turned their back and wanted to go back to idols. And I think it's fitting that Moses' last act on earth was to climb a mountain. Because Moses died the way he lived. He died climbing. During his lifetime, Moses also lived by the promises of God, and he died by the promises of God. From the top of Mount Pisgah, Moses could see all the land that God had promised to give the children of Israel. And on top of that summit, God gave Moses the e-ticket tour. And he starts out by looking to the north to see the land that's out in that direction. And then he turns around and looks to the east. And then he twists and looks to the south. And then he looks to the west. And Moses is like a beacon in a lighthouse, slowly turning a circle, seeing all the surrounding countryside. And I can imagine that as God revealed those different locations to Moses, that Moses must have looked and said, "Wow, look at that one. Man, that's beautiful. Man, the people are really going to love that valley." And you can imagine how excited he was to see those places. But to Moses, they weren't just places. They weren't just a vision. I think Moses saw each one of those places as a real destination. He saw them as a real possession. And even though he would never actually set foot in the promised land, he knew that God would keep his promises and bring Israel into the land that he had promised to give to his people. You know, Moses died the way he lived. He died believing the promises of God. He also died in the presence of God, just as he had lived every moment of every day. I think it's significant that Moses spends his last moments on earth in intimate fellowship with God. You know, this is a man who stepped into God's presence, who spoke with God face to face. And so Moses dies the same way he lived, in the very presence of God. You know, the first lesson I think we can learn from the death of Moses is that Moses died the same way he lived. He died climbing. He died believing the promises of God. He died in intimate fellowship with God. I think the second lesson that we can learn from Moses' death is that Moses died at just the right time. Look again at verses 5 through 7. It says, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated." You know, there are some people who age quickly. There are some people who look older than they really are. There are some people that live such a hard life that it just weathers them. And you might jokingly say it's not the years, it's the mileage. On some of my visits to Russia, we would see people that had lived such a hard life that they looked to be 60, 70, 80 years old, and we would discover they were 45. But because of such a hard life, they looked so much older. Well, that wasn't the case with Moses. For Moses, 120 was the new 80. And here he is. He began his career in Israel, or in Egypt, as a very strong young man. And as he grew older, he kept that strength. He always had that sense of looking forward